I grew up in a house filled with older brothers, who all eventually went off to college when I was still in high school. My senior year, I became close with a friend who I shared an affinity for weapons with. Since we both enjoyed hunting, we would go often. One day, we stumbled across a couple of really mangy-looking dogs with multiple injuries. He suggested we put them out of their misery, and I reluctantly agreed that these poor dogs would be better off. It seemed like a fairly humane thing to do. I never thought much about it until one day I went with him to his place, and he showed me something he was particularly proud of, a calendar with markings all over it. He said it was his trophy calendar. So I assumed he meant it was where he marked all his hunting trips on. I was right, but not quite like I expected. This calendar contained confirmation of all his kills, hunting trips or not. Chipmunks, random vermin, local cattle, farm stock, even neighborhood dogs and cats. I cut contact with him after this. I really didn't like this side of him. I hunted for sport or food, nothing more. After a while, though, I caught up with him again in a different county, and he invited me to a local gun show. I explained that I wasn't really okay with his calendar, and he said he stopped. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was still fun to be around, and I didn't know many people who could handle rifles, crossbows, and hunt quite like he could. But after a while, his scary side kinda came back. He began boasting about his conquests and started talking about how easy it would be to get away with murder once you know what killers do wrong, because he started reading a lot of material on serial killers. Ashamedly, I turned a blind eye to this. We lost contact again. A couple of years later, while I was reading a newspaper, I came across an article about several unsolved murders in the area. A few days later, a report came on the news with a rough sketch that looked a lot like him flashed on the screen, and it referenced that this person was possibly linked to 11 total murders. I was really torn up inside. I didn't know what to do because I've always been loyal, but there's a point that even loyalty doesn't reach. I was sick to my stomach that I'd ever known such a person if it turned out to be him. I contacted local authorities and told them everything I knew. I provided them with a description and pictures of him, as well as gathered a few pieces of incriminating evidence, and they were able to pinpoint him using surveillance footage. Thankfully, he was found guilty. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive sentences of 30 years to life, and eventually died in prison from cancer. When I was about 13, I was really good friends with this girl named Shayla. She was going through her goth phase, like a lot of people, and was picked on at school. I knew she cut herself and that she had some problems. But I'm not one to judge anyone, so I didn't listen to what people said about her and decided to keep being her friend. One day, I invited her over my house for a sleepover. Sitting on the porch, we decided to make a scrapbook, and she cut herself with the scissors. I gently took them away from her and suggested another activity. She laughed and agreed, like it wasn't a big deal. Later, when it was time to have dinner, instead of eating dinner at the table, she ate my dog's food out of the dog bowl. When it was time to lay down in our sleeping bags and watch a movie, she picked one of the ones from the Saw series, which was pretty popular, so we ended up staying up late watching them. I was exhausted and turned the TV off. I said goodnight and rolled over in the sleeping bag, and I heard her say, "Do you want to play a game?" It creeped me out, but I laughed it off. However, she then started telling me that Satan was coming for me tonight, and I couldn't take it anymore, so I went to talk to my parents. They agreed to take her home. When I went to look for her to let her know it was time to leave, she wasn't in the living room. I found her standing in front of my little brother's crib in the nursery, watching him sleep and cutting herself again. The next day, I opened the composition notebook in my school. I noticed that she had drawn out very detailed pictures of saw-type traps and drew me in the traps. I never invited her to my house again. The next week at school, she choked a girl in the bathroom and almost killed her. Growing up, I lived with my mother, father, sister, and brother. My dad was always really nice to me, but not my mom. Sometimes at night, I could hear Mom on the couch crying softly and talking to my aunt on the phone. She would say stuff like, "I'm scared. I think he's going to kill me." One day after dinner, my dad was particularly mean to my mom. When my dad went to sleep, she came into my room and told me we were going to stay with my aunt for a while. Mom gave us all small backpacks to fill with essentials, and in minutes we were out the door. Mom was paranoid that he would find us one day, but things seemed to be fine. Until one day we noticed a van following us on our way to my little brother's baseball practice. My father was driving it. He began to rear-end our car, attempting to run us off the road. We were on a residential street at the time, and eventually our car was rammed into a tree. My mother told my older sister to grab her cell phone and call 911, but she couldn't find the phone. So we got out of the car. It was at this point that my father climbed out of his car and drew his gun. He started shooting. I saw my mother and brother go down with blood pouring on the ground around them, and then he aimed the gun at me and fired. My left shoulder exploded in pain and I fell to the ground. I was about to try to get back up, but my older sister was on the ground beside me and whispered, "Play dead." And so I remained as still as possible. That's the last thing I remember. When I regained consciousness, I heard loud sirens and a paramedic informed me that my family was being rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. My mother and brother were both dead. My father was later arrested, and the police recovered a note in his car that stated, "They are my everything. If I can't have them, no one can." He is currently awaiting the death penalty, and I testify every time he files for an appeal.